Hi everybody, my name is Hayden Alexander Butcher. Welcome back to Hangin' Vibe, episode 18. In this episode, Ben will join me to discuss a few great bands, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, this Sunday, Jonathan continued his series on 2 Samuel. He preached on chapter 4, verses 1 through 12. You might hear some lawn care equipment going off in the background, but what can you do? Anyways, this passage records the third time David is given the news that someone of his enemies has died, and the first time he was informed that Saul was dead, and the individual who told him thought that they were giving him good news, but David did not take it well and had the guy who told him executed. The second time, he found out that Abner was dead, and again he, mourned for Abner and had a proper burial for him. Now, King Ishbosheth of Israel has been assassinated, and the people that assassinated him came to David with his head and said, "Look, your enemy is dead." And again, David informs them that this isn't good news, and you're not going to be rewarded for killing the king of Israel. So I think the most compelling point that Jonathan made in this sermon was that people keep trying to get in David's good graces by illegitimate means, and it teaches us about how people try to get into the kingdom of God by illegitimate means. We try to impress Christ by our good works when we don't even realize that we're not impressing him by anything we do. This passage actually foreshadows another member of Saul's family that does get into David's kingdom by legitimate means. That's Jonathan's son Mephibosheth, who would have been the next in line for the throne, but his nurse or whatever fled when the news of Saul's death came, and took Mephibosheth with her, and in doing so also dropped him and made him crippled. So not only is Mephibosheth in hiding right now, but he's not fit to be a king either. So with nobody left in Saul's family to take the throne, David is made the official king of Israel. And later on, we will read about David inviting Mephibosheth into his family, not by Mephibosheth doing anything, but because of a promise that he made to Jonathan. And that's teaching us about the proper way to enter God's kingdom, which is by the promise that Christ made with the Father, the covenant that they made together, that Christ would die for his enemies to be welcomed into the kingdom. So that was a really interesting take on that passage, and a really good way to apply that to the church. And in the evening, Jonathan preached on 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 2 through 16. This is a passage that talks about head coverings, so it was definitely a tricky passage, and he acknowledged that right away when he started preaching on it. He taught us a cool acronym that I had never heard before. The acronym is SCAN, S-C-A-N, and this relates to Scripture. Scripture is S, sufficient, C for clear, A for authoritative, and N for necessary. He used that to kind of basically defend the fact that even passages like this, which are tricky and confusing, they're still worth preaching on because they're part of Scripture. In terms of the actual issue of head coverings, Jonathan basically teaches that was a response to the culture at the time, and that since culturally head coverings don't mean the same thing they used to, it's not a command for the church, for women in the church to wear head coverings anymore. But the principle is that God created men and women different and with different roles, and that the way we act and the way we dress and the way we present ourselves should reflect who God made us to be. So what the culture determines men should look like and what the culture determines women should look like, well, we should take that into account when presenting ourselves. So that's really the gist of that sermon. There is more in it, but that's kind of the main point. I guess I'll record a little disclaimer here. When I recorded the segment with Ben, somehow I neglected to record my audio, so I'm actually recording my audio after the fact. So some sections are going to sound a little bit awkward and won't really flow as naturally as it did when we were recording together, but hopefully this episode is still enjoyable. So now I'm here with Ben. He is joining me from the virtual world. Normally we jump right into music, but I thought it'd be nice to just do some chatting beforehand and talk about our weeks. So Ben, how you doing? How's your week been?
Yes, I had a really good week this week, which is nice in comparison with the week I had 2 weeks ago. I was really having some mental health struggles and just some dysregulation. We moved the 14th of this month, so about 2 weeks ago. And anytime there's dysregulation like that, I really tend to struggle as someone with BPD. And it's just been it's been an adjustment period, but 2 weeks ago it was really bad. I was able to recalibrate and made it to therapy and made it to a 2.5 mile run. So I mean, it worked in. And then after that, I mean, it was I had a really good week this week. Just work was good, and I saw my first game at the Big House yesterday, actually, to close the week out. So the Big House is it's Michigan's stadium. Yeah, U of M stadium. Yeah, never been. Michigan has been my team since I was little. Love them. And I had a buddy at work who said he couldn't go. He had tickets and passed them on to me, and I was like, all right, that's pretty rad. So yeah, so we won. Not the way I wanted, but we won. Yeah, it was just, we could have played a lot better. So it wasn't kind of crazy. Tim Walls was there because we were playing Minnesota. So yeah, so there was like Secret Service and security and all sorts of things. It's crazy. Yeah, but it was a good week this week. Just kind of, learning to kind of take the bad with the good and just trying to weather the bad, the negative. It'll get better. You know what I mean? So it turned into a really good week this week, and I think this week's going to be pretty good too. How about you?
And my week was good. On Friday, my sister and I went to see Beetlejuice. And
yeah, I was going to ask you how that was.
It was pretty good. I would say not as good as the original, but it did have a lot of elements of the original in it, like the kind of animation style in some parts was similar. Like they used that kind of stop motion claymation animation in some parts that was really done well. And just the visuals of the movie seemed to align pretty well with the original, like just the costumes and the sets and stuff. It was visually a pretty good movie. So all right, well, let's get into the music portion, shall we?
Yeah, let's do that.
the first artist I'm going to talk about is Prefuse 73, which is an artist that actually I found out this week that Ben, that you are also a fan of.
Love this artist.
So Prefuse 73, his real name is Guillermo Scott Heron. His style is very like kind of underground hip hop, and a lot of electronic elements as well. He uses a lot of vocal samples, and what he does is he chops up the vocals and kind of uses a lot like Pogo, who we spotlighted in the summer. He uses the vocal samples kind of as like an instrument, and one of the songs that is a really good example of this is called Point to Be. I think this was the first song I ever heard by him. It's from the album Vocal Studies and Uprock Narratives, which he released in 2001. You get a good idea of the vocal sampling that he uses in this, the chopped up vocal samples, kind of glitchy sounding in some parts, and also just like beautiful jazzy melodies in the background. He uses a lot of jazz elements in his music too. Another great example of the jazzy instrumental is the song Last Night, which features vocalist Sam Prekop. Yeah, I love the vocals in this. I love the jazzy elements. Kind of a little bit lo-fi sounding too, like sounds a little bit like a lo-fi hip hop track, sort of. And then another song I like from that album is called Blacklist, which features MF Doom and Aesop Rock, who are two like underground rappers. This also has some jazzy vibes, so there's like different sections, different sort of loops that cycle throughout the track. There's a section that has some cool trumpet and some cello samples.
I can stop anytime I want to. Famous last words that came back to haunt you. All your life like permanent dry tears. Some cats get it like.
And then there's this section that has like a really cool kind of like a glass instrument. I don't know what instrument it is exactly, but it makes me think of like, you know, when people run their fingers around the rim of a glass. It just has like a cool kind of ethereal, like atmospheric sound that I really like.
Let's recreate a perfect service rooted in labor, lust, and a discipline criminal. Your work ethic antithesis, parallel park, your burning crowd adjacent to the flagrant iron ego.
And then you had a song from this album that you wanted to talk about too, right?
Yeah, Nuno. I think it's pretty early on. I think it's like track 2 or something like that. Kind of similar to Point to Be, where the vocal samples are just really chopped up and incoherent, but percussive. There's a section where I think he says something, words of wisdom. I point like tape or something, and then he repeats that. And then on the third time, it just goes like, it's like he takes the very first millisecond of each word and then loops it again really fast. And it's just a really interesting way to, like, oh, let me put this in here. Like how would you, sonically as an ingredient, how does it come to be? Or did he just like, let me just see what I can do when I, chop it up, slice it really thin? I think he did that all on like a pad, and then like sampled it, like used the pad as an instrument, which I do know his first like real hip hop instrument was an Akai MPC whatever. Probably a similar one to what Jay Dilla used, but a lot of those early, 2000 like instrumental hip hop albums were made with Akai sample pads. So yeah, I wonder if he did it all on there, just like loaded the samples in there and then sliced them up in there, or if he actually did it on a computer. Either way, it sounds meticulous to process samples that way. So
Yeah. So another album that I like by Prefuse 73 is called One Word Extinguisher, which he released in 2003. And the first song I heard on this album was called The End of Biters - International. Again, makes good use of like chopped up vocals and stuff. The second half of this track is really nice. It has some nice jazzy hip hop vibes. And then another song from this album that I like is called Choking You. This one has like an echoey, I think it's a cello sample. It's some kind of sample that's echoing and looping throughout, and also has this like 8-bit synth that loops throughout the song. Has a lot of electronic elements in this track, and there's like an upright bass in the background that's really cool. That kind of, you know, lends a little bit of the jazzy vibe to it. At the end of the song, it switches to some different loops, and these I like the sound of these loops. They sound really cool. Another song on that album I like is called Busy Signal, which features an artist called Dabrye, which is actually the next artist I'm going to talk about. But this is a kind of collaboration between the two. And it opens with this like stuttering loop. And then just throughout the rest of the song, it sounds really cool. There's some horn loops that play throughout that I really like. And then the last song I want to talk about by Prefuse 73 is called Styles That Fade Away with a Colonnade Reprise. This might be my favorite track by the artist. It has some nice upright bass and some like soft atmospheric synth loops. This just has a lot of chill elements in this track that I really like. And the ending is funny. There's like a section at the very end that's like just straight up like saxophone solo, and then you hear like some applause, and this like sounds like a middle-aged lady in the background going like, very good.
first song that I heard was Storm Returns, which is off One Word Extinguisher. And no, not like too, the sampling isn't too, it's kind of the opposite of like that percussive style. It's very like weaving and kind of like, you know, I believe there are, it sounds like reversed guitar samples or something like that. And a lot of just like downs. I don't know how he's getting them. Maybe he's using modular synths in some, or modular synth effects in some way. I don't know if he has a rack mount or anything, but it's a pretty simple structure. It just sounds like really chill. I don't know why. I usually listen to it around fall. This makes me want to put on a hoodie and like walk outside. I can't quite explain why I feel that way, but just really chill and kind of hauntingly beautiful, but also kind of like, it's not in your face. It's just kind of like it's a nice space. I like that song a lot. This first artist I'm going to talk about his name is Steve Reich. Maybe it's Reich. I call him Reich. But I would say I have kind of known who he is. I've kind of known of his work for a long time. Maybe like 10 years or so. But I really got into him about a year and a half ago. His name started popping up somehow. I don't know what it was. I think I was probably still really into Radiohead. And I know Johnny Greenwood has performed one of his pieces called Electric Counterpoint. Really cool. You should see it. But started getting into just minimalist composers a lot more. And it turns out he's kind of like the godfather of it all, him and Philip Glass. But Steve Reich, in my opinion, is probably the greatest, and maybe I would say in the second half of the 20th century, probably the greatest composer. I would. The first piece I want to talk about first is Piano Phase. Pretty straightforward piece, but what the important thing to talk about is this also uses loops, but live loops, performed loops, and it's crazy the way this is performed. So he was experimenting with stuff, and he was like, well, why don't I just put a simple phrase, relatively simple phrase on a tape recorder on piano and then play along with it. What he did with the tape was he would speed up a 16th. Gradually, and then another 16th and another 16th. And then he was like, wow, this is really cool. And he decided, he's like, I should just do this with another piano player. And he got this other piano player, and they performed it live. And this, to me, just sounds incredibly hard to do either job. So you're one guy who has to play it consistently, or you're the other guy who has to, move around the guy who's playing it like rock solid, and you have to move up a 16th of a beat. I don't want either one of those jobs. That sounds like taxing, and just like I wouldn't even. Yeah, that sounds insane. But the thing that stands out to me about this piece is, and this is all over Steve Reich's music, is you'll start to hear different rhythms, like as it goes on. And you'll start to notice your brain organizes it differently. And different pitches come out, and the different rhythms come out. And I would say that is a lot of what Reich's music is about. It's you kind of hear things that you didn't know were there at first. But it's the same, phrase played over and over again. It's just like, well, now it's in a slightly different spot. And Piano Phase is great for that. A nice companion piece to this would probably be drumming, which is a pretty much the same thing, but I forget how many drums there are, but or how it's even set up. But kind of the same idea. One drummer's just going, and then the other ones build around it, and kind of a similar thing with Piano Phase, and it's the same effect. Your brain starts to organize it differently, and you start to hear things in that you didn't know were there. They're both great, but Piano Phase is a great place to start with Steve Reich's music, I would say. The next piece I want to talk about is It's Gonna Rain.
I like the part where he says, "It's gonna rain."
That's it. Yeah, that was a peak moment of the album for me. So, going from Piano Phase to It's Gonna Rain, this is like kind of the same thing where you're hearing it differently as it goes on. But now we're dealing with speech. And I do want to, since I'm talking about Reich, quick plug, I'd like to recommend a book, Conversations. This is with Steve Reich and all the other people he has conversations with. There's a conversation with Stephen Sondheim in this book, where Stephen Sondheim was one of the greatest musical composers ever. He did Company. He did, I think, I did the lyrics for West Side Story. He did Sweeney Todd, Into the Woods. Um, just mastermind. Musicals would not sound the same without him. And his Pulitzer masterpiece is Sunday in the Park with George, um, which is a great all-time musical. Gotta see it. It's on YouTube for free. Go look at it. Go look at it. What's also on YouTube is this conversation that's in this book between Stephen Sondheim and Steve Reich. And Stephen Sondheim, at one point kind of talks about the similarities between their music, right? Because they both use speech. So here's, I just want to read a little bit from this conversation that they have. It says, Steve takes many of his pieces from the inflections of the way people talk. And the fact is, as many people here must know, he has made pieces out of the way people talk. And I do the same thing. My melodic lines always reflect the character and what the character sounds like. And that is song. I consider what Steve writes songs when he's dealing with text, particularly when he's dealing with the musicality of text. Not when he's just setting a poem, but when he's dealing with the musicality of what I'm doing right now, what I'm doing right now, what I'm doing right now. And later on in that conversation, Sondheim says that he writes vamps. I don't know if you know what a vamp is. It's kind of like a small. It's basically like, and it happens a lot in musicals when maybe there's some dialogue in a song and the piano's just going like bum 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 ba bum 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 ba like over and over again while someone may be talking. Just as a quick example. So there are similarities between, musical writing and what Steve Reich is doing. For this piece, he went down to a park somewhere, and there was this black preacher kind of giving a sermon. This was in the 60s. And he was, passionately giving his sermon, as you can tell from the small sample. And what he did, again with tape loops, and this is in the 60s, so this is pretty, innovative for the time period. And he put the same sample on 2 different tape loops. Now this means he actually cut the tape, right? And they have to be perfect. But I think the tape recorders were a little bit off or something. But what the effect is essentially like phase shifting. And so sometimes they're not going at the same speed, sometimes they are. And the first part 1 is great. Part 2 is really where I think it comes out and you start to hear all the. Part 2, I guess, was, as a fun factoid about this, it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he's talking about Noah's Ark. And then, yeah, you have to listen to part 2 if you're going to listen to part 1, just because I like part 2 much more. But it was kind of, there was this tension. I mean, think of kind of like any social issue or world issue at the time, or at any point in time. Like, we could probably, don't want to get into it, but think of some world issues going on right now, right? That maybe have people feeling a little tense. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was just really prevalent at the time he was making this, and he said it sounded like the world was falling apart with part 2. I mean, it does, because he's giving kind of a sermon of, some fairly, I mean, it's about Noah's Ark, so it's some pretty, apocalyptic overtones, and he put that out as an art piece, kind of speaking to, or at least within mind, the Cuban Missile Crisis, specifically the feeling of it, the world coming apart, the world ending. So, It's Gonna Rain, parts 1 and 2. Gotta hear it. I did listen to Smudge Hawk, by the way, and we could put that in the suggested tracks of this episode for sure. I was actually impressed. That was pretty cool to listen to. Yeah, I liked it. Where do you remember what those were? Those sounds?
I actually had a tape recorder when I was in middle school, and my friend and I would record ourselves just kind of goofing around and stuff. And I think I achieved that effect by, while talking, I would hit the record button and then I would hit stop, and then I would start recording again and then stop, and I would just keep pressing the record and the stop button rapidly so that I was only recording little snippets of me talking. And then obviously I put it all into Audacity and looped it and kind of faded in between the different sort of loops. I really enjoyed checking out different trains. I loved the train whistle.
This is probably the most accessible of the ones I've recommended. The most, like, listenable, I guess you could say. But this is kind of the same thing as It's Gonna Rain. It's, or at least in the same vein. It has to deal with speech, and he's dealing with the melody of speech. Different Trains is very much that. And he couldn't draw any stronger lines, I don't think. Because there's like a lady on a train and she's going, "Oh, I just took the train to New York." And then I think it's a cello or something, and the cello will go ba 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 ba. And it's uncanny how accurate this is all notated, and it's uncanny how he mirrors it with melodic instruments that we know and can recognize. It just blew my mind the first time I saw it. That may have been the first piece I actually listened to, and then when I got back into him, years later, I was like, oh man, this is just, for me, it's like perfect music, and it just sounds good. It starts with you hear the train, and then the violins are like they're complementing the sound of a train, and then you have the vocal samples over it, and then whatever other instrument he chooses to mirror what vocal sample he just said, and then it changes tempo and changes the chords, which you kind of don't expect in a way, because you're kind of hooked into the speech and what's happening there, and then it's like, oh, he's really making music out of this.
I love how because it's separated into 3 different parts. There's part 1, which is before the war, part 2 is during the war, and then part 3 is after the war. Part 2 is interesting because you can hear the air raid sirens throughout, so it kind of has a very sort of scary vibe.
The Germans won't.
It'd be one thing if he just did this one time. He did it over and over and over again, getting these ideas and presenting them to a cohesive format. I mean, it's incredible to me. So absolutely, please listen to Different Trains.
My first exposure to Steve Reich was, I think, in a college class. I think it might have been my music appreciation class. We learned about Steve Reich and how he's kind of one of the pioneers of electronic music because of the way he produced his songs. And the song that I first heard by him was called Heavy Smoke from his City Life series. I love the melody of this one and the sort of chord progression in it. And it's similar to Different Trains in how the instruments kind of replicate the pitch and inflection and stuff of the vocals. So yeah, I love how he does that.
Gunshots are weapons on you. What were you doing? What were you doing?
So the next artist that I want to talk about is called Dabrye, or Dabrye, or however it's pronounced. I don't actually know. His real name is Tad Mullenix, and his style is kind of similar to Prefuse 73. He doesn't really do the like vocal sampling that Prefuse 73 does, but he does have like a kind of jazzy hip hop vibe. One of my favorite songs by him is called "Making It Pay," which is, you can currently listen to it on Spotify on the album 1/3, but it was originally released on an EP called Payback in 2003. But this is one of my favorite songs by him. Has this cool like swinging beat and some nice distorted bass, and there's like an awesome loop throughout that's like sounds like an electric organ or something. But I really like the melody that plays in the organ. Yeah, and then the album 1/3, or I guess maybe it's like 1 out of 3, because there's 3 albums that are like it, like 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So I think it's like a trilogy of albums. But 1/3 was originally released in 2001. It was re-released in 2018 as like a remastered version. But I like the song "The Lish" from that album. Just has a really cool distorted loop, some nice bass, and of course some really beautiful saxophone. And then also I like the song "We've Got Commodity." It's similar to the song "The Lish." It has like that sort of distorted synth loop in it, and some more synthy bass that I like. And then there's the song "Truffle No Shuffle." This one's got like an interesting quiet sort of bell loop, and the beginning of the song is really like, you get mostly the bell sounds and the drums, and then later in the song the bass comes in, and I don't know, something about the bass in this, I really like the way the bass sounds. And then another album that I want to talk about by Dabrye is called Instrumental, but it's like instrumental without the vowels, so it's instrumental. He released this in 2002. I like the song "Evelyn" from this album. It's got a very nice jazzy sound, has some pretty sounding Rhodes piano, and some quiet saxophone samples. And then another song I like on that album is called "No Child of God." This one's got like a cool stompy beat. Lots of like the synth and the bass in this track kind of have some soft dubstep vibes. And then also from this album, I like the song "Gimme Lowlands," which is like a slow and chill track, kind of dark sounding a bit. And there's some nice like sliding synthy keys at one point. Alright, the last song I'm going to talk about by Dabrye is called "Air." Particularly, I like the instrumental version. from the album 2 out of 3 or 2/3 instrumentals, 2006. I love the rising synth melody in this, with like the strings in the background. It's just a really cool melody that's like kind of rises up, goes da-na-na-na.
My second artist is his name is Eric Whitacre. I think of him as a choral composer, I guess, because that's kind of how I was introduced. If you were in high school in the 2010s or late 2000s, you were probably familiar with some of his work. If you were in a choir, the first song I heard by him was called "The Seal Lullaby," which is off his how do you pronounce that? Lux Aromatica? Aromatica? No, I'm sorry, it's not. It's not. That's the first song off the album Light and Gold. It's the name of the album. But that first song, Lux Aromatica, is a great example of these kind of creeping chords he likes to hang on in his music. And they're just kind of, they're not creepy, they are creeping, but they, the way he shifts melody with voices is incredible to me. The Seal Lullaby is gorgeous. I did not sing that in choir, but my mom put on a concert after I graduated at my high school, where she was the choir director, and I attended it after I graduated, and they sang it there, and I was really into it, and then I just started listening to his music from there. He had that album, Light and Gold, and I would steal it every now and then and listen to it, and it's just classic. Another one, I think it's called "What Snow," but again, it's in Latin, and I think it's in parentheses at like what snow. But it's falsetto in the at the beginning, and it's just really pretty sounding. The album I'm more familiar with, believe it or not, is his album called "Water Night." And I could probably talk about every song on this album at length. Well, I will talk about my favorites. The first one is "Alleluia." Perfect. So, funny enough, he actually wrote that for like a wind band. So it's a piece of music called "October," which you should also listen to. But it's the same thing melodically. I mean, it's the same thing. The only difference is he was really impacted by going to Vespers, I think, and in a chapel, and just the acoustics of how voices sounded in that room. And then he just took the phrase "Alleluia" and put it to his music "October," and it works perfectly. Yeah, the way the men's section will kind of take over the melody for a second and then fade it back, and vice versa with the women's section, soprano or alto. It's sounds perfect, and I just wonder, what the parallels are between that and a wind band, like. And so I'm really starting to try to learn that in my own study of music. But yeah, "Alleluia" is a great piece of music that I love. Second song on that album is called Equus. I'm not sure. I think it's Latin for horse. And there is on the Spotify album, he does have, or there is a version on Spotify where he gives a little introduction to each. So I'm more or less paraphrasing what he says, but I mean, he just had that melody lying around, and he was going to get rid of it, and then a friend of his, Stephen Bryant, who's another composer I really admire, um, was like, "Are you going to use that?" And he's like, "Nah, probably not." And he's like, "You better use that, or I'll steal it." And so he was like, "All right, I guess I'll use this." And it starts with that melody that I bum ba dum ba dum bum 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 ba dum bum ba dum. And he said he just had the vision of a horse running through the night. It does sound like that. I don't know why. It makes me kind of think of Beauty and the Beast. I'm not quite sure why, um, but that kind of white, uh, a horse running through a forest or something. And it does kind of sound like traipsing to galloping is kind of the vibe I kind of get when I listen to that. And it's great orchestration. It sounds great. It sounds like a movie. Really shortly, I'll recommend the River Cam off of that, which is kind of I guess it's a cello piece. It's gorgeous. Um, that's a If I were to introduce someone to the cello, they had no idea what a cello was, I would probably play this for them because he really uses all the range. There's a part where it's just the cello playing, and it goes from like the lowest note to the motif of the melody, and he's just really showcasing the cello in this one. One I want to definitely talk about is Her Sacred Spirit Soars. Um, and this is a choral piece. The album switches back and forth between like orchestrated pieces, orchestral pieces, and choral, which is why this is one of my favorite albums ever. But on Her Sacred Spirit Soars, there's this kind of I had this experience once when I was listening to it, and I had my eyes closed, and it was like I could follow where the notes were going, and there's kind of this ascending and then descending, and then again with the interweaving of the women's section and the men's section, and it ends beautifully. Absolutely listen to this song, Her Sacred Spirit Soars. That might be my favorite choral, one of my favorite choral works. I'll say that. I'm going to end with Water Night because that's the name of the album. And there is a video on YouTube of Eric Whitacre's Virtual Choir, which is kind of like it's a choir virtually. It is, yeah, it's everyone's on a webcam, I believe, and they are all singing their part. I have no idea how that was accomplished, or what kind of bandwidth they needed to get that done, or whoever edited that must have, made a killing. That just seems like a nightmare, but it was done. And it's a great choral piece. This is another one where on the album he did it for strings, and still just as beautiful. I believe the choral version is on Light and Gold, I believe. So I should also recommend really quick, there's a song called Sleep that he does, which I think is also off Light and Gold. That was one that was circulating around high schools, in high school choirs, around the same time. And yeah, beautiful music. go to Spotify, check out Eric Whitacre. He's a great composer, and I'd really like to make music like him someday.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week. Hope everybody enjoyed this episode, and remember to check out the Spotify playlist in the description so you can hear all the tracks that we talked about this episode. Thanks again, Ben, for joining me in this episode, and hope to have you on again soon. In the meantime, everybody have a good week, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye.